I hate all these journalists, especially the ones what earn off us, you know what I mean? Like Ariel Helwani in particular. You're doing it for exposure. No, you're not. You're doing it to put money in your pocket, Ariel, you little rodent. Lads.
Woo! I just sat back and let that go. I didn't want to interrupt.
Paddy! Paddy!
That was a close one.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't close. What, just think people fight to the night or what?
Paddy, massive star, but he's had some ups and downs in the sport lately. And you've been calling his career. This is Brad Wharton, everybody, from Cage Warriors commentary. You've seen it from the, indie level to now. I mean, you saw him before he even debuted in Cage Warriors. So how would you kind of, mark this point in his career? How would you talk about it?
It's interesting, I guess, because we're talking about a guy who's had 5 fights in the UFC and has won them all. It feels like every time it's like a comeback almost for Paddy. Obviously, he's had time out with injuries and things, but it's weird that we're talking about a guy who's on this big winning streak as a guy who's, having this comeback arc kind of thing, this comeback story. He's been completely successful in everything he's done. Now, I guess the sort of nature of it is that the stuff that's gone out around fighting hasn't gone as well for him as that big hype train that he was coming in, and we've seen this happen in similar ways throughout his career. Through the early days in Cage Warriors up to the point where he's headlining the Echo Arena, and now in the UFC. He's an incredibly outspoken guy. And I think when you've got an international sport like MMA, that makes you Marmite, right? People will either love that or they will hate it. As long as they're paying, it doesn't really matter from a prize fighter's point of view, but it's easy for me to say, sat here, I'm not the guy seeing 10,000 comments on every tweet that I make calling me an idiot or telling me I'm trash kind of thing.
We're talking about this comeback redemption arc. People have fallen out of love with Paddy for different reasons. For some people, it's his comments with the interviews regarding Ariel and wanting to be paid for interviews. And for some people, it's just the performance against Jared. From my perspective, or at least what I want to know, I could ask you here, Brad, a lot of fans, they get told that this guy is a big prospect. Oh, look, everyone's paying attention to him. There's loads of hype. And then they see them fight. And I think a lot of people look at Paddy and maybe think, he's not as developed as some of the other top guys in the division. And Paddy is a guy who stayed in Cage Warriors longer than a lot of other guys, right? Where he continued to develop. So how far along the scale do you think Paddy is? Do you think we've seen the best of Pimblett? Do you think he's still got ways to go? Was there a lot of growth you saw in Cage Warriors as well?
It's tough with Paddy because he's got that thing where he's an absolutely elite submission guy. His grappling is so unique and so dangerous. I mean, I've seen him, just messing around with people like in a gym or before a show, and he's an absolute nightmare. And he just toys with people. I don't think we've really seen that in the UFC yet. And I think it's like when you're that good at something and you're very, very young, it's very easy to sort of fall back on that. And I think Paddy himself has been really open in that he said, what needs to happen now is that my striking needs to catch up. And he feels like it has been. Of course, a big issue for him is that he's had really bad hand injuries as a young man. I mean, you've got to remember this guy's been having essentially full rules MMA fight since he was 15. He's 29 now, so that's a lot of wear and tear on a young man's body. And when you've had breaks of the hand, we were talking earlier on about when he fought Soren back and nearly finished Soren in the first round, had that rear naked choke on, couldn't clamp it down because his hand was in a really bad way.
Jeez,
I didn't even know that.
How different could that have been? That was his first headline slot at the big arena in Liverpool. He was a genuine, by that point, a cult figure around Liverpool.
What was it like when he lost to Sorenbach? What would you describe the kind of fan sensation around him at the time? Where was it at that point?
Well, I think it really encapsulates the wider situation that we have now. Immediately after that decision was read out, I mean, it was first round aside, it was, he lost in decisive fashion. Pretty confident in saying that he lost rounds 2 to 5. And there wasn't even anything in it.
He looked pretty gassed after the first round as well.
Yeah, he'd really gone all in on that rear naked choke that he didn't get. Obviously, had the hand that was broken again as well. And everything was kind of all right. And the crowd was still behind him very much up until the decision was read out. And then you sort of felt the atmosphere get sucked out of the room. And it turned a little bit. There were some idiots, throwing drinks into the cage and, You know, I don't think that was necessarily that they weren't turning on Paddy. It was just kind of it just felt like a bit of a nasty air. And I think after that, you then saw that split for the first time of the guy who's like the cult hero. All of a sudden, you know, I hate the term casuals, but, you know, the losers in the crowd were like, oh, this guy's rubbish. He's all hype, all talk, you know, can't back it up at the end of the day. But then you still had the loyalists who were there and packed out the venue the next time he fought. You know, he came back and got the crazy flying triangle choke against Alexis Savidis, and all his mates were cage side, kind of rushed forward, knocked all the barriers over. We were thinking we were going to have a cage invasion on our hands. They all stopped, picked it all up, put it back in place. Really well-behaved, polite guys.
Wow.
But then you kind of saw that split for the first time, and I think that's what you see online now. The Tony Ferguson fight, for example, like that was a no-win fight for Paddy, because if you'd have knocked him out in the first round, everyone would have said, well, it's Tony Ferguson. Of course, he's knocked him out in the first round. If he beats him by decision, well, he's not finished Tony Ferguson. And if he loses, Paddy's rubbish. You know, there's no way to win 100% of the people when you're a divisive character like that.
Do you think he's can make it to the top 5 of the division, maybe a title fight?
Yeah, that's a tough one because you never really know. And I think it's especially tough with Paddy. Paddy's like a wild card if there ever was one.
Definitely.
Like even the Luigi Vendramini fight, he got rocked in that. And a lot of people walked away as fans of him, but they were also kind of like, I don't know. But then he knocked him out. You know, he has a lot of performances like that where you think he's going to get put away. He comes back and he wins it in spectacular fashion. That's what he did with Luigi Vendramini. So if there's any fighter where I've been more unsure about that question, but also can see it happening.
Yeah.
It's like you can see both sides of that legitimately happening. It's just so hard to tell with somebody like Paddy.
You know, the whole Scousers don't get knocked out, right? that didn't come from him having incredibly one-sided fights. That came from, like, he got caught a few times in Cage Warriors, and he's been caught a few times in the UFC, and that's where the Scousers don't get knocked out thing, because he's took these big shots and then come back to win fights. I think you could say of absolutely anyone in the world, if they don't improve from this point on, how far can they go? And the answer is going to be not far. This is a sport that is evolving constantly. It's only, 30 years old or thereabouts. Everyone has to evolve constantly to get anywhere. And I think that will be an evergreen statement. Paddy's 29, so he's, arguably entering the physical prime at the moment. I see no reason why he wouldn't be improving. His striking has improved from a few years ago when he was in Cage Warriors. We got to see very little of it back then. So the fact that he, was hitting guys hard and got that knockout against Vendramini shows that. Of course, he's got to keep improving. If he stays still, he's going to stay still or go backwards.
Against Bobby Green, at least I think we talked about the game plan. I would assume Paddy's just going to try and take him down and choke him out. He might even get him in the first round if it all goes according to plan. If it doesn't, and he has to strike with Bobby, then, that's where people have questions, I think.
Yeah, I definitely played devil's advocate really hard for Ferguson going into the Paddy fight. I was like, he's been losing to all the top guys in the division, and a lot of people would probably pick Bobby Green over somebody like Paddy, on the feet at least. And so now we're going to actually get to see that matchup, which is really interesting. Obviously, I was wrong about Tony Ferguson, but
it's a good fight, though, because I think if Paddy can go in there and take down Bobby Green and submit him, he's proved he could probably do that against some of the other guys in the top 5. Like, if he can do that against Bobby Green, then his skill set is already good enough to utilize that against better guys. So this should be a good test.
In MMA, if you look at anyone who's been a success in terms of actually making money, rather than their actual achievements in the cage, anyone who's made it big, made a life for themselves out of any combat sport, really, it's the guys who are Marmite. Ken Shamrock, half the people liked him, half the people hated him. Tito Ortiz, Conor McGregor. It's been like that since day one. Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is beloved now, but he certainly was not back in the day.
Dude.
There were a big portion of boxing fans had a lot to say about Muhammad Ali, and most of it wasn't very nice. But look, people are either paying to see you win or they're paying to see you lose. The point is that they're paying, and Paddy, for me, is that guy, which means okay, obviously he's sat there thinking, I'm going to be a UFC champion one day, and who's to say that he can't be? But at the end of the day, Paddy will probably walk away from this sport in a lot better of a position than many of his peers, because he's been able to harness the crowd either way. Maybe this is part of the whole being a Scouser thing, and in sports, they're used to going to other people's backyards and being hated, and they kind of love it. They kind of thrive off it, right? Even here in the UK, there's the whole Scouse not English thing. They generally speaking don't really mind that stick, and I don't think Paddy does either. he's talked a lot about the mental health side of things that he's had to endure. And, you know, for him personally, I don't think a lot of that came necessarily from people having to go on Twitter. Like, you know, if you watch his TV show that he's got out at the moment, he talks quite in depth about the fact that, you know, his sort of dark times that he had and that caused him to speak out about that kind of stuff came from when he was injured. The fact that he wasn't able to do the only thing that he knows how to do. You know, bear in mind, this is a guy he's never had a job, right? He's just fought and trained. So I think mentally, I don't think the fact that some people hate him now is really going to be that much of an issue for him. I think if anything, he'll actually rise to the occasion. Like, you know, if he gets some idiot at a press conference saying something about his hair or how well he fights or anything, what's he gonna? He's not going to cry about it. He's going to call the guy a mushroom and move on. And everyone's going to laugh, right?
You sausage.
I think there may have been like you said, you've probably got a better opinion on this than anyone else. That's why we brought Brad in here. But I think there may have been a period where perhaps the fans turning on him probably did affect him. But I think he's passed through all of that at this point anyway. He's back posting on YouTube. And as soon as he started getting back into that, kind of had this vibe of, well, he's not going to pay any attention to all the haters. He's going to get back into what he was doing. If the views are less than they were, doesn't matter. Like, this is my content. I'm going to keep making it. So I think he's moved through all of that. And yeah, I think you're right. He's going to feel more invigorated.
Well, that's actually a point to bring up, though. The YouTube views and the kind of decline there. I'm very curious about that. So there's a good chance you have not heard of this YouTube channel, but they're called Sunny V2. I've watched some of their content. I don't pay a huge amount of attention to it, but 2 weeks ago, they put up a video that got 2 million views talking about the downfall of Paddy, which is really fascinating to me that it's reached outside the bubble. And so it is ironic that it's a video about Paddy's downfall and his lack of popularity in his YouTube channel, but it's getting 2 million views talking about Paddy. So there is that interesting dichotomy. So is it just right now that he's maybe popular and unpopular to the extent that people don't necessarily want to watch his content? They just want to see him get in there and prove it? Or what do you think is going on there that's causing people to want to watch less of Paddy?
I don't know. I think people kind of relish in the downfall of others, right? You know, it's go back to like the gladiator days. You know, people weren't necessarily turning up to see a fight; they wanted to see someone get their head chopped off, right? So, you know, in terms of like Paddy like doing his own thing and people being less keen to watch it, yeah, sure, maybe that is a thing at the moment. But I guarantee you this: if Paddy wins his next 5 fights, and in 2-3 years from now he's fighting for a title, he will be the biggest name in the sport. People like to back a winner, whatever they say. You know, Conor McGregor, probably the most divisive guy in the history of the sport, but those tickets that went on sale, the biggest game in UFC history, it's no mistake why. Like, people wanted to be a part of that, and there were probably people who bought those tickets who will slate him online, but they'll be telling everybody they're going to the Conor McGregor fight, and it'd be the same for Paddy, it'd be the same for anyone.
What do you think of the analog to? So we were talking about other guys that have gone through Cage Warriors doors. Ian Gary, he's been kind of experiencing a similar situation lately. You know, a lot of popularity on the onset and maybe not as much now. I'm just curious, like, are there any other analogs that we can kind of look towards? Ian Gary, obviously, if he is going to make a comeback, have we seen comebacks in careers in terms of popularity due to just winning?
Yeah, I think, you know, look at Mike Bisping. You know, he was always Mike Bisping was always like the pantomime villain, right?
Yeah.
You know, because you got to bear in mind, like, he was so popular in the UK because he was our guy at the time, right? A lot of guys weren't around when Ian Freeman was in the UFC, so he went on tough, and Americans kind of hated him. And
the spit fell out of his mouth on Rivera's team. It fell out. Exactly. It fell out. It was an accident.
Well, even
stuff like that. And then he loses to Dan Henderson, and it's like, oh, he's never going to be a champion.
Right.
And then eventually he kind of gets that shot and does it, and all of a sudden he's like a beloved guy again. You know,
that's because he did knock out Luke Rockhold. Though.
That is true.
Knock out a hated guy, you become celebrated.
But what if there's a hated lightweight in 2 years' time, and Paddy flying triangles them?
True.
You know, he'll be the most popular guy in the world.
He'll be the hero, yeah. Well, it's so funny that you point that out, because you were talking about the trajectory of fans kind of going against somebody and rooting for the downfall. There's so many examples of that. I mean, literally in the midst of telling the Bisping story, people are rooting for the downfall of Rockhold.
Yeah.
Because, oh, nope, he's too far on the high horse. We got to knock this guy down. He's too cocky. Meanwhile, I will maintain this. I don't mind being the lone American in the room saying this. Michael Bisping was cocky as hell.
Oh, yeah.
He was super cocky. And if you look at the end of the first fight, Rockhold goes over, shakes Bisping's hand after he just choked him out, right? I believe it was an RNC. I can't remember. It was some
one-arm gi.
One-arm guillotine.
Yeah,
Oh, is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either way, he gets a submission win and says, hey, I respect you, thanks. And there was plenty of trash talk before that. Michael Bisping, on the other hand, jumps on top of the cage and yells, fuck you.
But he also goes over to him and he's like, do you know where you are, buddy? Like, it's just like, it's like, don't worry, it'll come to you in a minute. It's
That's just
like,
my level.
The pantomime villain is the perfect
Well,
word.
you and I were talking about press conferences that were almost as good as the fight. This is a rare exception with the post-fight press conference because they were talking just as much shit after the fight, maybe even more afterwards. So, I mean, yeah, it goes all towards your point, though, of saying, yeah, sometimes people do really, really root for the downfall, but they also root for those underdogs. So I guess kind of bringing it back to this Paddy situation, I'll direct this question to you. If you're Paddy, what do you do?
Get a haircut.
To get this kind of redemption arc?
I wouldn't get a haircut.
That would be such a bad
That was
idea.
just too quick.
That's like Samson cutting off his hair.
To get the redemption, choke him out in the first round. I like that the Bobby Green fight it's like there's enough doubt that if he does get a win, it pays off really nicely. It's not like beating Ferguson when there was loads of like diminishing returns to that win or whatever. You beat Bobby Green. A lot of those haters are probably going to give you some props, especially if you do it in a convincing way, if you can neutralize him. I think people just want to see a skill set that they can believe will be able to beat the top of the division. And if they don't see that, win or lose, those same people are not going to be invested, I think. So I believe in Paddy's ground game, and I think his striking is very creative. He's just got to get, if he wants to win those people over, then I think he needs to, demonstrate the high level.
People will like say about Bobby Green, oh, he's like a top 15 guy, as if that's not incredibly impressive. He's not great because he's in the top 15. If you're in the top 15 in the world at anything, you are by default great.
Elite.
It amazes me when people say, oh, he's not even in the top 10. Neither are you. You're not in the top 10 at anything, ever. You never will be.
Yeah, neither are the thousands of fighters in the weight class all around the world trying to vie for the same thing.
Bobby's also been there for like 10 years as well. It's even more impressive.
Jim Miller, for me, is an all-time great fighter because you don't hang around. Look, how many guys have you seen in the UFC and they've had 2 fights or 3 fights and gone? Or 4 fights and gone, or 5 fights and gone. He's been around for ages, an all-time great. If Paddy beats one of those guys, he's up there, and there's no denying that. You know, for me, it just speaks to like the respect that we should be putting on these guys. Like, if you get to the UFC, you are elite at your craft. You have done something that the vast majority of people in your trade will never do. And to talk about guys in the top 15, to talk about guys like Paddy like they're not great, is insane because they are.
Is there a point where he should just lean into the fact that people, if they do dislike him, it's like, all right, fuck you, you know?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, why not? And, you know, I think maybe as he gets a little bit older, maybe he does lean into that a little bit more. You've got to remember as well, like, he's in his 20s still. Like, you know, he's learning how to be a professional prize fighter every day. And there's more to that than just fighting. Like, he's doing the TV stuff now. He's doing the media appearances. You know, why not be the Chael Sonnen of the UK and just, you know, lean on that, you know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I know you kind of hate me, but also, like, you're going to watch me anyway. Like, why not? For me, it's the smart thing to do. I think, and I always tell young fighters this, like, it's not, if you want to make it, it's not just enough to be a good fighter, because unless you are that 1% or that 0.0% that wins every fight you ever have, it's not going to work for you. So you need to find something else. And if that's being a bit gobby on the outside, and if that's saying, well, hey, you know, you're going to boo me for this, so I'm going to do it anyway, why not go for it?
So this is UFC 304. This is a big weekend for UK MMA, but there's also the UK's biggest promotion, Cage Warriors, is hosting an event in Manchester as well.
Yeah, we've actually got 2 events that week. So we've got Saturday, the 20th of July in London. We've got the 50k prize fighter. We've got a huge interim flyweight title fight between Amir Malikpour and Nicolas LeBlanc, 2 guys who are probably 2 of the biggest knockout artists of flyweight in Europe at the moment. So that's going to be pretty cool. Obviously, we've got the 4-man one-night tournament. Someone's potentially going to walk away with between 50 and 70 grand. So huge prize money for this level of sport. That's going to change someone's life. And then, yeah, we're in Manchester on Thursday, the 25th. So just after the UFC press conference finishes, we'll be having an event in Manchester. There's going to be 2 world title fights on that. I think, again, about 20 fights or so. So it's an insane week. And look, if you look at this UFC 304 card, tell me how many guys came through Cage Warriors. Tell me why you shouldn't get to Cage Warriors that week and see the next lot of guys coming up. you can get tickets to Cage Warriors Manchester for like 40 quid, and you could be seeing on that card maybe 7-8 guys that will be in the UFC in the next 2 years. And you can stand 10 feet away and you can shake their hand afterwards and talk to them and maybe have a beer with them afterwards. Like, this sport is so accessible at that level. I think MMA fans don't know how lucky they have it. Like, you can't do that in football for the most part, but if fighting's your thing, get down, support your regional shows, support your UK and European shows, and then when they are in the UFC headlining, you can be that douchebag saying, I knew this guy 10 years ago.
All right. Well, shout out to all of our channel members as well.
Yes.
If you guys want to see the full unedited version of this podcast where we say everything perfectly and we make no mistakes, you can do that for $2.99 a month, less than the price of this cup of coffee. So,
but not less than the price of the cup itself.
This is solid gold.
Solid gold, baby.